This is the web transmission service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On March the 8th, our first military history night of 2023 featured Captain Kevin Junor, who gave us a presentation on the heels of Black History Month on the history of the all-black 2nd Construction Battalion of World War I, the difficulties and overt racism its members endured in order to voluntarily serve their country, and their long campaign for recognition. Welcome to the first Military History Night of 2023. We didn't plan it that way, but that's the way it worked out, and it warms my heart greatly to see so many people in the room. I also want to wish you a happy International Women's Day, that being today. Now, if I were Reed Morton, and I'm not, I would now speed through the introduction by saying Kevin Junor needs no introduction. Here he is. But I won't do that. Kevin has had a career in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves that spans over 3 decades. He was appointed the Regimental Sergeant Major for his unit in 1998 and was later commissioned. He has participated as a speaker at military training colleges in the United Kingdom, the USA, and Jamaica. He was deployed on missions to Sierra Leone and on Operation Impact to Jordan. He was also a member of the National Apology Advisory Committee, responsible for the Government of Canada's apology to the descendants of No. 2 Construction Battalion. Kevin is also a retired Deputy Superintendent from the Ontario Ministry of the Solicitor General. During his career, he has held various positions, including Deputy of Operations at the Toronto Don Jail, during which tenure he did not supervise many famous hangings. He was the Director of Compliance, Use of Force Investigations, Manager of Institutional Services, and Emergency Response Training. Before joining the Solicitor General's office, Kevin held other positions including Policy Advisor, Change Management Consultant, and Senior Business Advisor. He is currently the president of Kevin J. Services Consulting. His awards include the Order of Military Merit, the Harry Jerome Professional Excellence Award, and the Ontario Public Service Amethyst Award. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, and very appropriately at the termination of Black History Month, I would like to invite Kevin to take the podium.
Is this where I get nervous?
Too late.
I'm blessed and I'm humbled to be standing at the RCMI to speak to you tonight about a topic that is passionate for me. To the Vice President, to all the dignitaries that are here, I truly am humbled. I'd like to speak to you for a few minutes as a soldier. We have historians in the room, Kathy Grant, and others, but I'd like to tell you a story. And as I tell the story, I hope that your knowledge of the No. 2 and the knowledge of the journey in the Canadian Forces will be increased. When I was confirmed to speak, I came up with a topic for King and Country, and very appropriate now that we now have a king. So we've really come full circle. So I'd like to start by going backwards a little bit. War broke out in July 1914. When war broke out, Canadians decided that they're going to enlist and fight for king and country. And as they went about doing that, we saw that, I was told that I can't walk around too much, so it's very unlike me, but I'm going to comply today. So there was a view that, if you don't enlist, you're a coward, right? So we had individuals who decided that I want to serve king and country. The newspaper and all published documents would say, you've got to go out and you've got to serve king and country. Join the military. Very passionate conversations going on across the country. Then it came around 1916 when it seems that things weren't going as the country wanted it to. So the government decided that, I'm going to change things a little bit. Minority folks have been trying to join the military, and we've turned them away. But let me see what I can do in bringing them in and see if I can actually make this work. By 1917, people weren't joining anymore, so they decided, I'm going to force you. If you're of a certain age, you have to join the military. And it caused a little bit of problems, but that's the Canadian landscape. That's the conversation that's going on right across Canada. I'm going to make this a little bit personal now. When I joined the military in 19... I was running around Cedar Valley Collegiate in 1980, and a recruiter came and he said, hey, I'm going to pay you for joining the military, shooting weapons, keeping physically fit and all that. And here I am, 17. I said, hey, why not? You can pay me and I'll do that. And I'll have a good time. But as I joined the military, I had the opportunity to hear about a lot of regiments. I heard about the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. I wore the cap badge of the Toronto Scottish. I heard about the RCR, the PPCLI, and all these other units. But at the bottom left-hand corner, I put a cross through that because there was nothing about that cap badge that I heard. It wasn't until I became the RSM that somebody told me about this number 2 construction battalion. And when you think about that, here I am at the highest point of my career where I can influence, and I'm just starting to find out about number 2 construction battalion. I humbly present to you that it changed my life. It changed my outlook, and it allowed me to do some things that normally I wouldn't do. Anthony Sherwood made a docudrama for my country. I was sponsored by the Canadian Armed Forces, and I was working at NDHQ at the time, and I saw that, and we launched that docudrama. But at the same time, there was Calvin Ruck, Senator Calvin Ruck. And as Senator Ruck did his research, we see the Black Battalion. And that book was presented to me, and I started to read, and I started to hear some stories about the Black Battalion. I started to hear about these brave men. And as we looked at these brave men, things started to happen. And things were happening in a way that I didn't understand. And if I can, I would say that at this point, I was the national co-chair for the Defense Visible Minority Advisory Group. And this was a group that spoke on the behalf of all visible minorities across the Canadian Forces. At the time, they were focused on Ontario. Me being me, I couldn't just stay in Ottawa. So within a year, we had a true national group going from Vancouver all the way to Nova Scotia. And one of the individuals that I had recruited was Captain Harj Sejan. You probably heard that name. And we got educated about No. 2 Construction Battalion. But while I was being educated, I learned quite a bit about black men who wanted to fight for king and country. And when they stepped up and said, I want to fight for my country, for my king, they were turned away. But for 2 years, these men and community leaders fought for the right for them to be able to serve. And again, in 1916, the government cautiously decided, let me look at minorities, Aboriginals, Black Canadians, Chinese, and Japanese that were Canadian. Let's open the doors so they can actually fight. And again, they didn't have as many soldiers that was there to fight. But in April 1916, something happened. Britain came back and said, hey, we want some people to do laboring. And they decided, here's an opportunity for us to have 2 labor battalions. We're going to have one that represents the white folks. And by the way, these black folks have been pushing me too hard. So let me give them some. So we decided that we're going to have a 2nd labor battalion that was black. Kathy, am I doing okay so far? So here we have the men now in a position where they can actually do something. So most black men were rejected to serve. And a common message that they heard was, it's a white man's war. And this phrase was coined from back in the Boer War. And again, it's still being used in the First World War. It's a white man's war. So I'll tell you, if that was me, and they said, I don't have to go to war, I'm going home. I'm going to sit back, I'm going to have a coffee, and I'm going to enjoy myself. But not these men. They kept on fighting. And I look at a letter that was written, and it was written on November 25th, 1915. And it says, by the commanding officer, I have been fortunate to have secured a very fine class of recruits. And I did not think it would be fair for these men that they should have to mingle with Negroes. I'm going to show you a series of letters because I don't want you to think that I'm making this up. This is actually there, recorded in history, that this is what black men in Canada faced. Today's International Women's Day, and although we had women fighting in the First World War, No. 2 Construction Battalion was all black men. So I move on, and I realized that while men were being rejected to fight, there's a man, Reverend White. And, you know, if I may say, if you talk to black folks, the minister wields a big stick, right? If you go to a community and you want things to happen, you go to the pastor, you go to the minister, and you said, this is what I want. And the likelihood is the community will follow that person. Another letter that I found, and a lot of these documents, again, I want to thank Kathy Grant and Colonel Scott Moody for some of the great research that they've been able to do. And in this letter from the 106th Battalion, it stated, a colored man from Truro tried to enlist in the composite, or the RCR, and we refused to take him. After a recruiting meeting, this guy, Reverend White, approached me, the CEO of the 106, about the matter. Since then, word came from Ottawa that there should be no distinction of color for enlistment. December 14th, 1915. So we have Reverend White, who will play a significant role as we move forward. He's there saying, you know, there are things that we can do, and always ready to make things happen. When I was doing this presentation, I found a picture of him in uniform, and I had that there first, and I said, no, I can't put him there because he's not an officer yet, right? So I had to make sure that I didn't mess that up, to be historically correct. And then I came to Toronto in January 8th, 1916. And the Canadian Observer, and if you notice, it was worth 5 cents at the time. It said, colored men to form a platoon approved by General Sam Hughes. So here we have, all of a sudden, the approval for us to have a platoon right here in Toronto. And at the bottom, you'll see that was a box where individuals can actually fill in their names and say, I am interested, put my name forward. Because the plan at the time is when they have enough men that put their name forward for a platoon, then the name of the platoon can be sent to Ottawa, and then further actions can be taken. By March 25th, 1916, the letter from the Secretary of the Department, it said, colored men can be enlisted in any overseas unit, providing that the commanding officer is willing to accept them. And I felt kind of nice when I saw that, because all of a sudden now the CO's got some authority. And we're hoping that the CO is supportive. But then it went on to say, it is not in the best interest of the force to force the CO to take them. So, on one hand, you're saying it's okay if the CO wants to take these black men. But if you don't want to, we're not going to force you at all. Right? And this continued for quite a while. And I'm going to hit one of my kilted unit here in Toronto. And it stated on April 4th, 1916, being a kilted regiment, we always draw the line at taking colored men on the strength of the battalion. So, all you black guys, you can't wear a kilt. This to me is also very significant, in which the 3 kilted regiment within this area can all boast that at one time or the other in their history, the regimental sergeant major has been black. So again, it is showing that we've come a ways. And the talk that I'm doing tonight, I'm also trying to show that there is history of racism, but we've also moved past that to a level where we are now. But along the way, there have been some individuals who actually got into non-segregated unit. Curly Christian, in 1915, I couldn't find the exact date, but in 1915, he joined the military. And on April 9th, at Vimy, sorry, he was injured. And the story goes on to say that not only was he injured, right, but the stretcher bearers that were carrying him, 2 of them got killed while carrying him. So he cheated death again. So it is recorded that he is the only quadriplegic amputee that survived the First World War, right? He was able to join in 1915. Samuel Watt, he was a musician, and the story is the CO of the 187th wanted a band. And Samuel was already well known as a musician, so it was very easy to bring him in to the band. And if you remember, it is up to the CO to make the decision. So the CO said, Samuel, you're in my band. And when he went to England, he was transferred to the 50th. And when you start losing soldiers, you want people that's trained. And they're saying, I don't need a band, I need fighters. So Samuel was transferred to the 50th, and he did lose his life on the front line. And if you notice, the dates that these men are joining, it's in 1916, just around the time when the military decides that let's cautiously take some minorities. Previously, I spoke about the CO of the 106th talking to Reverend White. And here we see the 106th again, recruiting a guy called Jeremiah Jones. When they started to recruit black men, some people in the regiment saying, hey, I know it's up to you there, CO, but let's not go overboard here, right? And it said that they were able to recruit 16 men, but then things started. But Jeremiah Jones, he has quite a history. But a significant date in the history of the battalion, July 4th, we saw that the CO decided that he would accept the position of commanding officer. And the letter went out that Mr. Daniel Sutherland, a railway contractor, has been appointed to command number 2 construction battalion, unit composed of Canadian Negroes, officered by white men. July 5th, 1916. July 5th, 1916, number 2 construction battalion was officially authorized to be formed in Nova Scotia. Going to Pictou, Nova Scotia, and then to Truro. Black men from across Canada were able to join the battalion. Across Canada, the US, and the Caribbean. They were the only unit that had a national recruiting mandate. And I like when the CO took over and he said, your fortune are equally at stake as those of your white brethren. So he leveled the playing field so that we can now get men to serve. The recruiting posters that went out, I looked at it and said, take your choice. If you're Scotch, Irish, if you like medicine, like horses or fancy riding, like noise or big guns. This part is funny. If your eyesight is poor or you're partly unfit, we'll still take you. Right? And then you had the Forestry Battalion, and then you had number 2 Construction Colored Men Battalion. Although they're saying take your choice, if you're a black man, you only had one choice. And that's just an example of colored men being recruited here in Edmonton, and we can see in Windsor. On November 7th, the badge that we see and we recognize today was actually approved. But the minister said that the badge to be without expense to the public. I'll let you think about that one for a second. And we've got a picture of the battalion. To the left, red circle, that is now Captain White, the only black officer that is serving in the battalion. And I like the one where you see the little child over in front of the battalion there, right? I just put that in there for effect. Then we're going off to war. March 28th, 1917, number 2 Construction Battalion, with 595 officers and men, sailed from Halifax, Nova Scotia, on the SS Sutherland. And they arrived on the 7th. But when they got there, they were told that you're not a battalion, so we're going to reorganize you as a labor company with 500 officers, and the others were a reinforcement. What really touched me was the fact that the CO took a demotion to major so that it could stay with his unit. And it speaks to this man who he is. The fact that he accepted the position to be the commanding officer, and now he's taken a demotion so he can stay with his troops. That's leadership. They were deployed in support on May 17th. A lot of logging operations in the Jura Mountains. Operation to maintain the water system that supplied the camp. They maintained the roads and helped build logging railroad. Cutting and hauling trees. They made sure that after you cut and you had the lumber, it had to be moved to the railroad tracks so that it could go wherever it's required. And I was able to find some photographs online through Kathy and through the Canadian Forces. The black soldiers working alongside other white patriots in Le Jour. And the camp, not unlike what we have today, when you first get there, you're living in tents. And if you're blessed, you might be able to move into some hard shacks. But they lived through that for the first part until summer 1917. And on the right, you can see that, there's a lot of horsepower there. There was some questions about if they had any sort of machinery, but I didn't see any machinery that was available. And what I also found out was the horses that they got, they were B-class horses, so they were the worst ones possible. So here we had the men doing their labor, but also had the worst horses that they could find. On the left, you can see them along with Russian soldiers. In the middle, you can see operating the mines and their daily work. And you know you got to have the hospital. So the lineup for the hospital is always there. You know, the MIR first thing in the morning, sick, lame, and lazy. Well, there's no difference between then and now. I would say that the lumber that these men cut was essential in what we're doing. For the infantry folks that's here, you know, after you dig your trench, you want to make sure that you get enough lumber to keep the sides up. And if you can, you put some on the floor so that you're good to go when there's too much water. So these men made sure that they had enough wood for the trenches, artillery gun platforms, railway ties, ammunition boxes, and how can we forget the accommodation huts? The work of number 2 construction company allowed the mills in the Jura to produce twice as much lumber as any other forestry companies. Just think about that, right? The fact that they were there, they had that impact on the region. So we're not talking a 5% difference. We're talking double the amount of wood that is being produced. In my entire military career, there's always been a rift between the regiment and the band. But when the band strikes up, all the soldiers grow 2 feet, proud of the music that is being played. Well, it was no different for number 2 Construction Battalion. They had a band, and they did a concert in New Glasgow on November 7th. And it is said here that they were so impressed with how the band played, seeing that they've only been together for 6 weeks. On January 5th, the band was approved to come to Western Ontario. So they're bringing the band all the way to Ontario to play music so that they can recruit black soldiers. It's got to be a good band. While they're in France on Bastille Day ceremony on the 14th, right in the center of the parade, the heart of the parade, band of the number 2 Construction Battalion. But even the band was exposed to racism. An article spoke about some good things that they were doing, but at the end it said, at present, the Coons are performing for the Canadian boys at the big concentration camp in Wales. So it didn't matter what was going on. Racism always found a way into the conversation. When it was all over, number 2 Battalion was sent back to Halifax on January 9th, in January. And once they got back here, they were dispersed to wherever they were recruited from. And by the end of February, the majority of number 2 were discharged. And there's a couple of dates out there. September 15th or September 20th, the battalion was officially disbanded. The brave men of number 2 Construction Battalion showed pride and dedication. They wanted to serve king and country. And they faced the racism. Can you imagine when the government of Canada said, yes, I'm going to give you a uniform. You're now going to be a part of our military. And these men, proud men, decided that they were going to serve. And they saw white soldiers with rifles, but they gave them picks and shovels. But yet still, they said, I'm good to go. I'm still going to serve king and country. And their service was essential to the Canadian war effort. Because of what they did, Canada was successful. Still the largest all-black battalion in the history of Canada. Their patriotism, professionalism, discipline, resilience was demonstrative of the voices from all Canada, the US, and the Caribbean. The Consul General of Jamaica is here, so I threw this one in there for him. William Gale served from Jamaica. And after service, George Downey served not only World War I, but World War II. Hubert Greenridge not only served king and country, but he went on to being a doctor. Seymour Tyler served king and country and later served as a porter. But when these guys died, they couldn't just bury them in just a regular area. Some of them are buried in the CS, the colored section. There's a plaque that is here at Queen's Park that you can go and see. There are monuments in Pictou, Nova Scotia that speaks to these brave men. We came to the apology, where the good captain, George Borden, advocated, and in time, the government decided that yes, we're going to apologize to descendants of number 2. The National Apology Advisory Committee consulted across the nation and beyond, and proudly on the right holds the apology that was signed by the Prime Minister of Canada, where on July 9th, the Prime Minister of Canada stood up before Canada and he said, for the overt racism of turning black volunteers away when they offered to sacrifice their lives for us all, for the blatant anti-black hate and systemic racism that denied these men dignity in life and death, we are sorry. We've got national recognition, the stamp, and music. We've got the coin. Kwame, stand up, please. Kwame designed the coin for number 2 that is being sold at the Canada Mint. I want to end by saying our journey is a journey of discipline, a journey of resilience, a journey of serving king and country. From the days when the men of number 2 were given pickaxe and shovel in the CEF to today. Today, when we have a flag officer in the Navy, we have the Chief Warrant Officer that is in the Vice Chief of Defense office. To the right, we have a Sergeant Major in the infantry and a guy that I know quite well. The men of number 2 were not able to serve in the infantry, but today we are blessed to provide leadership to the Canadian Armed Forces. We're blessed to serve in positions impacting the organization. If I may say, in about a month, I'm going to turn 60 and I'm going to turn in this uniform. And when I turn in this uniform, I'm going to be very proud of that moment. And the reason why I'm going to be proud is that as a little boy, I joined this Canadian Armed Forces to make a few dollars and have some fun, not knowing how the military would impact me. Did I experience racism like number 2? Yes, I did. Did it cost me some discomfort? Yes, it did. Did it make me question my leadership and the organization? Yes, it did. But what it also did was to create the man that is standing before you. The man that is able and was able to serve king, queen, and country, making a difference, not just in my small part of the world, but being deployed to other places that when they saw me, even though they saw a black man, they saw a black Canadian man that was there to make a difference because I was blessed to represent Canada. I want to thank you very much for listening to me. Tonight, I have my wife that is here. I have my in-laws that are here. And they have supported me through this. And I'm blessed. God bless you.
I'd like to thank you, Kevin, for an inspirational speech. And it is now question period. And because his eyes are way better than mine, I'm going to ask Kevin to pick his questioners. So if you're overlooked, it's his fault.
And if I don't have the answers, Kathy will help me.
All right. Well, first, thank you for your speech. That was excellent and enlightening, and something that I wasn't aware of, so thank you for that. The question I have, at the risk of starting another history project for you, how did what happened in Canada compare to what was going on at the same time in our other allied countries on the same issue, if you know?
I don't really know as much. Kathy, do you want to say anything on that? She's giving me that look, so I don't think Kathy wants to say anything either. But what I can say is, down south, segregation, and even when I went down as the RSM, I knew that there was segregation that's still there. All right? So the other areas did do some work. I think Canada, historically, Canada's usually been ahead of the game, right? So I would venture to say that we were a bit ahead of the game, but probably not very much. Kathy?
I say that the United States didn't join until 1917, the first
Right.
and then I know that in Britain and France, they were accepting a lot of men from Africa as well, and some were able to fight.
Sir?
Captain, it's not all bad. At the same time, historically, you must tell the people here that we had 3 black persons who had received the Victoria Cross, all before the First World War. It's not all bad. It's not all good, but it's not all bad.
It's not all bad. Indeed,
The
sir.
other side of the coin that you were talking about, it's not all bad.
It's not all bad. Great point. This talk was focused just here. That's why I didn't go broader.
Kevin, I remember watching a documentary at some record, and it seems to me that the Royal Canadian Navy remained steadfastly segregated well into 42, 43. Or did I get that wrong?
Oh, you didn't get it wrong. If I had my phone, I'd pull it up for you. In the Army, it was not written But in the Navy, it was actually written that in order to be a member of the Navy, you had to be white. The document actually said you had to be white to be in the Navy. And I've got it on my phone, so I can even share that document with you. Just back.
Yeah, Kevin, you know, I've always been a big fan of Able Seaman William Hall.
Yes.
And his name is downstairs on the second floor up top. And in our old building, we have always had a nice picture of William Hall, looking very proud.
Right.
And he actually, I think he had met the king, and the king recognized him and knew who he was. And he was given his due as a man who served in India where my father's from. That's why
Yes.
he was Victoria Cross. So obviously he had some standing and some recognition from the king and others.
Right.
But something happened along the way. And that's the question I'm always asked. From that point where this fellow who served in the American Navy, served in the Royal Navy, wins the Victoria Cross in India, retires and dies as a gentleman in Nova Scotia, to the point where a black man, or Chinese, or Indian, I mean, I think in the Navy it was a Chinese fellow, Lieutenant something, who became the first Chinese officer in the Navy in the Second World War. But what happened in that period is something I've never understood. Why all of a sudden we go to celebrate a black man who wins the Victoria Cross, so somebody can't serve at all in the Army.
You know, without going into a lot, because again, I'm not a historian, the thing I'd say is culture got in the way, right? Culture gets in the way. And once culture gets in the way, the narrative changes.
Captain, you had 8 medals of honor given to black sailors, all before the black code in America, and all before they ever had a black officer in the Navy. It had to do with the civilian attitude and the black codes of America that filtered over to Canada. That person we talked about briefly was Christian, was quadriplegic. He was in the British Army. It was a grenadier. And he was the first paraplegic.
Quadriplegic. Thank you, sir. Roger.
Captain, thank you for your excellent presentation. Today being International Women's Day, who was the first black person to serve in the Canadian military as a woman, and how was the progression and promotion being a black woman in the military?
But you have to ask questions like that. See, that's why Kathy's here with me. Kathy, you got that?
I know there were a number that served in the Second World War. I'm not aware of any that served in the First World War. You can go back.
How was that progression being until today? Was you being black women in the military being promoted?
Well, I know that there's been like Shelley Peters, the first person to join the RCMI, and then she became the first black female lieutenant.
Lieutenant Colonel. So there are individuals, and you know we can talk more about that, but it is easier now to see that happening.
So I just did a quick search to answer that question. Marlene Pike of Nova Scotia was the first black woman, a reservist, to join in 1951 at the age of 17.
That is true. There were a number of women that served in the Second World War. One of them was Olive Wadman, and she was in the 40s, and her brother, Charlie Wadman, was one of the first black paratroopers in the 40s. There were
Major Peggy Downs.
Peggy was in my era, and Peggy did a great job. So
We're getting old, Kevin.
Thank you. There's another question, sir.
In that age, especially towards the end of the First World War, there was a lot of discrimination to go around in all sorts of different groups. The Asians, the Aboriginals, women, and so on. And there's also discrimination from the European troops versus the Canadian troops. I believe we were considered somewhat inferior, or rural. Can you comment on some of the degrees of discrimination faced by all of these groups?
But before I mentioned that culture got in the way, right? And when I say culture, I'm talking that European culture that says, you know, I'm better than you. And it's very pervasive over that period of time, where, you know, in one of the letters that I noted, when the command officer said, I don't think it's right for these white men to be beside these black men. So, you know, you've got that degree of superiority, and it's been around, and racism exists because somebody think that they're superior, right? And it continues to this day, and you look at the policies within the Canadian Forces, it's been changing. So now we have an organization that is inclusive. We have an organization that is supportive of diversity. And all we have to do is to practice what we preach. Okay. Next question. Sir?
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could just say that Kevin Junor was one of the first mentors I had in the Armed Forces. He has served the Armed Forces for 42 years. He taught me very early on that everybody bleeds the same color blood. If you can please join me in a round of applause for an outstanding Canadian.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And on that note, I'm going to ask our Senior Vice President, Bill Hines, who I see sitting right there in front of me, to come up and participate in an exchange of gifts with Kevin Junor. Gentlemen, it's yours. Just wait till I fire up the camera.
Ladies and gentlemen, in July last year, the Prime Minister of Canada apologized to the black community and descendants of No. 2 Construction Battalion. And the night before the apology happened to the public, in a private ceremony, the Minister of National Defense presented all the direct descendants with a medallion that signifies the apology. And on the behalf of the Black Cultural Center of Nova Scotia, I would like to present a copy of that medallion to the RCMI. Thank you.
Well, Captain Junor, Kevin, we will treasure this. I'm chair of the museum committee, and I can guarantee that we value commemoratives of this kind at all times. We are proud to have it, and we are especially proud to recognize what it is. We also, I want to thank you for bringing this matter to the attention of so many people over the last few years. I think, like most Canadians, I'm not aware of this period in our history. Now that it's been made clear to us how critical it was that we understand where you are coming from, what you and your team have accomplished. I want to thank you for everything you've done and will continue to do on behalf of the Black community. Thank you. No presentation would be complete without the traditional, I think Eric calls it the sacred beer mug. I present it in that light, and I hope you like beer.
It's not sacred to activate it by putting beer in it.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Moody. I'm the commanding officer of the Queensland Rifles of Canada unit, which Kevin so proudly serves. I won't be long. I just want to do two things, and I want to recognize two people tonight for their incredible work with regards to sharing these very important stories that we learn from. We get better every day by knowing. I've had the great pleasure of being a co-founder of the Black Canadian Veterans website, working with two amazing people, Kathy Grant and Kevin. But what I'd like to do tonight is recognize these two individuals for their work with regards to the Apology Committee on behalf of the regiment. And Pat Grant, come on up. So, for your steadfast dedication and hard work as a member of the No. 2 Construction Battalion Apology Committee, your ongoing commitment to telling the story of Black Canadian veterans and their important service to Canada. And next to Capt Kevin Junor, and I realized that this was the night to do it for one reason, and that's because I know you're retiring, and I'm very much know there's going to be a lot of recognition going tonight, but this is a fairly unique opportunity to do this. So once again, for your steadfast dedication and hard work as a member of the No. 2 Construction Battalion Apology Committee, and your ongoing commitment to telling the story of Black Canadian veterans and their important service to Canada, Kevin.
This has been another in our series of webcasts produced by the Royal Canadian Military Institute in Toronto as a public educational service. You can find news of upcoming events and links to our webcast archives at www.rcmi.org. On behalf of the RCMI, this is Eric Morse saying goodbye for now and thank you for joining us.